Hi everybody, it's Unique History Channel. Today I'm going to read the introduction from the Orthodox Church, An Introduction to Eastern Christianity by Timothy Ware. All Protestants are crypto-Baptists, wrote the Russian theologian Alexis Kamiakov to an English friend in the year 1846. To use the concise language of algebra, all the West knows but one datum, whether it be preceded by a positive sign, with the Romanist or the negative sign, where the Protestants in A remains the same. Now passage of orthodoxy seems like indeed an apostasy from the past, from its science, its creed and life. It is rushing into a new and unknown world. Komiakov, when he spoke of the datum A, had in mind the fact that Western Christendom, whether Free Churchmen, Anglicans, or Roman Catholics, have a common background in the past. All alike have profoundly influenced by the same events, by the papal centralization, the scholasticism of the Middle Ages, the Renaissance and the Reformation, and then the Counter-Reformation, and the Enlightenment. But behind the members of the Orthodox Church, Greeks, Russians, and the rest, there lies a very different background. They have known no Middle Ages in the Western sense, and have undergone no Reformation or Counter-Reformations. They have only been affected in an oblique way by the cultural and religious upheaval which transformed Western Europe in the 16th and 17th centuries. Christians in the West, both Roman and Reformed, generally start by asking the same questions, although they may disagree about the answers. In Orthodoxy, however, is not merely answers that are different, but the questions themselves are not the same in the West. Orthodoxy history in another perspective. Consider, for example, the Orthodox attitude towards the Western religious disputes. In the West, it's usual to think of Roman Catholicism and Protestantism as opposing extremes, but to an Orthodox they appear as two sides of the same coin. Komiakov calls the Pope the first Protestant, the father of the German rationalism, and by the same token he would doubtlessly have considered the Christian Scientist and eccentric Roman Catholic. How are we to arrest the permanent effects of Protestantism? He was asked by a High Church Anglican when visiting Oxford in 1847, to which he replied, "Shake off your Roman Catholicism." In the eyes of a Russian theologian, the two things went hand in hand. Both alike share the assumptions for Protestants, which was hatched from the egg which Rome had laid. A new and unknown world. Komiakov was right to speak of the Orthodoxy in this way. Orthodoxy is not just a kind of Roman Catholicism without the Pope, but something quite distinct from any religious system in the West. Yet those who look more closely at this unknown world discover it much, while different, is yet curiously familiar. This is what I have always believed. Such has been the reaction of many on learning fully about the Orthodox Church and what it teaches. They are partly right, and for then, 900 years, the Greek East and the Latin West have been growing steadily apart, each following its own way. Yet in the early centuries of Christendom, both sides can find common ground. Enthusiasts in Basil lived in the East, but they belonged to the West, and Orthodox who live in France, Britain, and Ireland can turn and look upon the national saints of these lands, Alban and Patrick, Gahurt and Vedid, Genevieve of Paris, and Augustine of Canterbury, not as strangers, but as members of their own church. All of Europe was once as much part of Orthodoxy as Greece and Russia are today. When Komiakov wrote his letter in 1846, there were in fact few on either side who knew one another by personal contact. Robert Curzon, traveling through the Levant in the 1830s in search of manuscripts which he could buy at bargain prices, was disconcerted to find that the Patriarch of Constantinople had never heard of the Archbishop of Canterbury. Matters have certainly changed since then. Travel has become incomparably easier, and the physical barriers have been broken down. And travel is no longer necessary. A citizen of the Western world need no longer leave his country in order to observe the Orthodox Church at first hand. Greeks journeying westward from choice or economic necessity, Slavs driven westward by persecution, have brought their church with them, establishing it all across Europe. America and Australia, a network of diocesan parishes, theological college, and monasteries. Most important of all, in many different communions during the last 100 years has grown up a compelling and unprecedented desire, the visible unity of all Christians, and this has given a rise in new interest in the Orthodox Church. The Greco-Russian diaspora was scattered all over the world at the very moment when Western Christians, in their concern for reunion, are beginning the consciousness of the relevance of Orthodoxy, and anxious to learn more about it. In reunion discussions, the contribution of the Orthodox Church has proved unexpectedly illuminating. Precisely because the Orthodox have a different background from the West, they've been able to open up fresh lines of thought and to suggest long-forgotten solutions to old difficulties. the West has never lacked persons whose conception of Christendom was not restricted to Canterbury, Geneva, and Rome. Yet in the past, people were voices crying in the wilderness. It is no longer so. The effects of alienation, which had lasted for more than 9 centuries, cannot be quickly undone. But at least the beginning has been made. What is meant by the Orthodox Church? The divisions have brought through the present fragmentation of Christendom occurred in 3 main stages of intervals of roughly 500 years. The first stage came in the separation of the 5th and 6th centuries, when what are known today as the Oriental Orthodox churches became divided among the main body of Christians. These churches fall into 2 groups: the Church of the East, mainly in what are today Iraq and Iran, sometimes called a Syrian, Chaldean, or Eastern Syrian Church, and then the 5 non-Chaldean churches: the Syrian Church of Antioch and the so-called Jacobite Church, the Syrian Church in India and the Coptic Church in Egypt, and the Armenian Church and the Ethiopian Church. The Church of the East has no more than 550,000 members, although it was much larger. Non-Chaldeans number altogether about 27 million. These 2 groups are often together lesser separated Eastern churches, but such titles must be avoided, implying that they do value judgment. His present book, which claims no cover to the Christian East in its full complexity, will not be concerned directly with these Oriental Orthodox, although we shall be referring to them from time to time, are subject to be those Christians who are termed not Oriental but Eastern Orthodox. They say Christians who are communion with the Ecumenical Patriarch of Constantinople when we refer to the Orthodox Church. It's Eastern, not the Oriental. Orthodox in what we have the view. Fortunately, in our own day, many great hopes of full recognition between these 2 families of Christians, the Oriental and the Eastern Orthodox. Its role of this first division, Eastern Orthodox, became restricted on the eastward side mainly to the Greek-speaking world. Then came the second separation, conveniently to the year 1054. The main body of Christians became divided into Western Europe and the Roman Catholic Church, and the Roman Rope and Byzantium Empire, the Eastern Orthodox Church. Orthodoxy was now limited on its westward side as well. The third separation between Rome and the Reformers in the 16th century has not here our direct concern. It's interesting to note how cultural and statistical divisions have coincided. Christianity, while universalist mission, has been associated in practice with 3 cultures: Semitic, Greek, and Latin. As a result of the separation of Semitic Christians of Syria, with their flourishing school of theologians and writers, were cut off from the rest of Christendom. Then followed the second separation, in which drove a wedge between Greek and the Latin traditions in Christendom. So has become that in Eastern Orthodoxy, the primary cultural influence has been that of Greece. Yet it must not, therefore, be thought of as the Orthodox Church as exclusively a Greek church and nothing else, but Syriac and Latin fathers also have a place in the fullness of Orthodox tradition. While the Orthodox Church became bountiful on the eastern and then the western side, it expanded to the north. At 863, Saint Cyril and Saint Medardus, an apostle of the Slavs, traveled northward to undertake missionary work beyond the frontiers of the Byzantium Empire, and their efforts led eventually to the conversion of Bulgaria, Serbia, and Russia. As Byzantine power dwindled, these newer churches of the north increased in importance, and on the fall of Constantinople to the Turks in 1453, the Principality of Moscow was ready to take Byzantium's place as a protector of Orthodox world. Within the last 2 centuries, there has been partial reversal of the situation. Although Constantinople itself remains in Turkish hands, a pale shadow of its former glory, the Orthodox Christians in Greece began to regain their freedom in 1821. The Russian Church, on the other hand, has in the 20th century suffered for 7 or 70 years of aggressively anti-Christian government. Such are the main stages which have determined the external development of the Orthodox Church. Geographically, its primary area lies in Eastern Europe. Russia, along the coast of the eastern Mediterranean, is composed of the following self-governing churches: Constantinople, Alexandria, Antioch, and Jerusalem. The Orthodox Church is thus a family of self-governing churches. It is held together not by a centralized organization, not by a single hierarch wielding power over the whole body, but by the double bond and unity of the faith and communion and sacraments. Each patriarch, or church, while independent, is in full agreement with the rest on matter of doctrine, and between them there is a full Sacramental communion. In fact, certain breaches in communion, particularly among the Ukrainian Orthodox, the situation exceptional. There is in Orthodoxy no one equivalent to the position of the Pope in the Roman Catholic Church. The Patriarch of Constantinople, since the schism between the East and the West, has enjoyed a position of special honor among all the Orthodox communities, but he has no right to interfere in the internal affairs of other churches. His place resembles that of the Archbishop of Canterbury in the worldwide Anglican Communion. This decentralized system of independent local churches has the advantage of being flexible and easily adapted to the changing conditions. Local churches can be created, suppressed, and then restored again, with very little disturbance to the life of the church as a whole. Many of these local churches are also national churches. For the past, in Orthodox countries, church and the state usually have been closely linked. But while an independent state often possesses its own archipelagic church, ecclesial divisions do not necessarily coincide with state boundaries. The territories of 4 ancient patriarchs fall politically into several countries. The Orthodox Church is a federation of local, but not in this case, national churches. It does not have the basis of a political principle of the state church. Among various churches, there can be seen an enormous variation in size, with Russia at one extreme and Sinai at the other. There are different churches in age, some dating back to the apostles, while others are a little more generational old. The Church of Albania, for example, has only become in 1937. Orthodoxy claims to be universal, not something exotic and oriental, but simple Christianity. Because of human failings and the accidents of history, the Orthodox Church has been largely restricted to the past of certain geographical areas. Yet to the Orthodox themselves, their church is something more than a group of local bodies. The word orthodoxy has double meaning: right belief and right glory, for right worship. The Orthodox, therefore, can make what may seem for a surprising claim. They regard their church as the church which guards and teaches the true belief about God, and which glorifies Him in the right worship, that is, as nothing less than the Church of Christ on earth. How this claim is understood, what the Orthodox thinks of other Christians, perhaps do not belong to their church, is a part of the aim of this book to explain. Okay, thank you.